Yo, what is going on, my fellow weebs? Chrono here. Welcome back to the channel. So today we'll be going over the new event weapons that came out with the Spring 2024 event and where they kind of fit into our weapon hierarchy. Should you use them? Should you skip them? And everything in between. Not a whole lot to say today outside of do the usual YouTube things. They're much appreciated. They help out a ton. In worst case scenario, you can always turn them off if you're not a fan. Either way, let's go ahead and jump into this. So what I was going to do is pull up the Visiphone, but unfortunately it looks like Visiphone is not updated with the new potentials. So we're just going to pull this up directly in game. So see you over there. So here we are next to Zia Andy. Go ahead and talk to her real quick. Pull up the actual event shop. We can take a look at the event weapons. Now we are going to be talking about what you should be purchasing from the event shop, probably in tomorrow's video. I'm not sure when. I mean, these are kind of important to get out as soon as possible since people are going to be going through this quite a bit. So I might move it earlier. So we'll see how things go. For any of my homies out there that are playing Grand Blue Fantasy Relink right now, how was your Lucius fight? By the time this video goes out, that should already be going. We'll be working into that. We'll be working on that today as well. Anyway, so looking at the weapons, we can see Millenium round blades is the soaring blades. It's basically just the gun blaze reskinned to green. So again, I don't really care too much about these event weapons being super unique or anything along those lines. They're mostly generic potentials. They're kind of filler weapons. And there were some interesting things that happened with previous event weapons with elements and how useful those were, but eventually they kind of got over it. It was a kind of a mess of a thing right now. So I'm not too worried about these ones, but if they ever bring back your unique potentials, more interesting weapons, things of that sort, I'd like to see some more unique looks for those weapons themselves. So I'm glad they're wasting these on weapons that aren't really that important in the grand scheme of things. So potential we're looking at, it's got 29% potency. This is of course level 6. This is maxed out for you already directly from the shop, which is why a lot of people look at these weapons as, hey, are these worth my time? Because they come out maxed out from the shop and they're level 80 max. So it saves you a lot of time on unlocking potential as well as unlocking the limit break so you can upgrade it. So we got 29% potency, plus 10% damage resistance, minus 10% PP consumption, and then photon blast charge when attacking plus 10%. So you get a lot of really useful stats here. And then you have Spring Setsune, which is the seasonal augment, which they've changed the seasonal augment to work a bit differently now. So now, no matter what, it has 3% potency, but also has versus Spring 2024 season enemies potencies plus 5 extra percent. So you have 8% potency, you have 15% crit rate, and 20% damage resistance. So it's pretty solid against seasonal enemies. Unfortunately, this still isn't super powerful like our previous event weapons were. Previous event weapons had like crit chance built into the base potential, and then like 25% crit chance on the Setsune. Only difference was that after the season ended, you know, the entire Setsune was worthless, which is totally fine, honestly. I don't think this really needed to be introduced into the game in any way, shape, or form. They should have left it how it was beforehand. People complaining that this was difficult to replace realistically weren't trying to replace it. It was not that difficult. So I think this is an L of a change personally, and I would love to see this go back to what they were previously, because seasonal weapons used to be just a fun power trip you could go on during the season, and then after season, you would go back to, you know, of course, what you had. It was also a nice way for players who just weren't super geared to, you know, feel as powerful as some of the super geared players, right? So it was a fun time all around. Honestly, I'd like to see this go back, and I'd like to see this on seasonal armor as well. That's pre-augmented. I would love to have a seasonal armor set as well. Like, let's say we had, you know, something that was in the place of this Ajax that had Setsune on it as well, and had like, you know, some bonus damage against seasonal enemies. Seasonal gear honestly is really fun in my opinion, as long as it's not super irritating to get up or get set up with, and allows players to be very, very powerful for a limited amount of time. So I'm all here for it. Either way, so as far as Setsune goes and the seasonal potential goes, they're not super amazing together. I mean, they're good, don't get me wrong, but they're not as good as the previous seasons, which means it's going to not be as simple when we talk about is something worth versus not being worth. So spoiler warning, we're going to be going over to a spreadsheet. We're going to be talking using Cakewalk's damage calculator. I'm going to show you guys an augmentation setup that you can use that's fairly cheap to use. Honestly, in my opinion, it's mostly free to use. You can get quite a bit of damage out of this. So this is going to be what we use moving forward when we do comparisons, and I'll adjust it based on, of course, class and things of that sort. And you guys can kind of get some ideas behind that as well. But this is also a trigger warning for those of you guys who don't want to get flashbanged by a spreadsheet. It is going to be all in light mode. So just know that moving into things. And yeah, just a sec. Fun fact, I forgot I installed dark mode reader, so you're not going to get flashbanged. Yay. Anyway, so this is Cakewalk's damage calculator. I'll leave a link in the video description to, and of course you can see the tiny link right here. Very easy to use. That way you don't have to worry too much about, what you're clicking on or anything along those lines. It should say NGS DMG Calc 3. This is the third one and updated. If you were using one of my previous links, it is old. I need to go back to my previous videos and update it, but that is a pain in the butt. So don't expect that to happen anytime soon. It'll be something I do on an off day or something where I'm not super busy. The way this works out, you can actually input all of your information here. It takes into account class skills and things of that sort. We're going to always, take into account our class skill. It doesn't really make much of a difference, but if you're trying to compare against different classes, different weapons, so on and so forth, it's a good idea to go ahead and fill these out and be as thorough as you possibly can. Of course, whenever you go to the link, you want to click over on, wait, what is this doing? I'll worry about that later. So you want to make sure you go ahead and click here on the file. You click make a copy. That way you actually have a copy you can edit and change things in. And okay, this is going to be a flashbang warning. I'm going to turn this off for a second. Anything that's in the orange tab is what you can change. Stuff in the gray tab changes based on what's in the orange tab, and you don't mess with anything else outside of what's on the drop downs in the orange tab. So there you go. I guess these also stay orange. I just don't want to confuse people when I said orange, and it's not actually orange if they're looking at it and they don't use dark mode reader, but I digress. Let's move on. So taking a look at what we're going to do as far as comparison goes, I wanted to show you guys a few things. So there's a section in here called weapon customization settings where you can have swap outs for specific weapons. So for example, if we're comparing the seasonal weapon, we don't want to use specific, we don't want to not compare with Setsu. We don't want to have to move things back and forth. Well, Cakewalk took this into a calculation. So we have this, and whenever you're comparing it with a season weapon, it's going to replace it with these augments specifically here, which is why I slapped all the LC, or why you see how I have LC augments on them. That's why you can see all this information here the way that it is. Super, super cool. So whenever we're looking at it, we're looking at these augments on the weapon, not what we have set up on our weapon and unit. It also works really well for something like the Mallet crit. So that's why if you guys are looking later on at the the table of comparisons, and you're like, well, that seems a bit off. Well, it's because the calculations are based on, for some weapons, calculations are based on replaced augments. In the case of Mallet crit, it also replaced the augs on the units as well. Yeah, also replaced unit augs. So very, very nice, super cool. I think actually replacing unit augs is specifically for reverse melts, but I digress. Moving on. This allows you to go ahead and choose what weapons you want to do comparisons of. Nothing too crazy there. This goes into what all the augments do. So everything is listed here. In case an augment is incorrect, you can go ahead and make a change if you need to. Character base stats. Everyone's is the same. Don't need to change anything here. Units, again, don't need to change anything here. We can just go over to weapon analysis. So looking at weapon analysis, what we went ahead and did was we changed up our augments to something that realistically everyone should be able to achieve. Not super difficult, not super hard to set up. It is literally mostly LCs and one SPO trio. The SPO trio is -5 PP, so you don't end up with a massive amount of PP, but realistically speaking, it's not the end of the world. If you're like, hey, look, man, we're using Rayar, I don't want to lose PP, you can go with the wardrobe one instead, which is minus I think, what is it? Wardrobe trial? I believe wardrobe trial is what is it? It was minus resistances, I believe is what it is. But I prefer to do minus PP because if you're playing properly, at least on Bouncer, you can usually maintain and be perfectly fine. Outside of the first 30 seconds of the quest, it's a little bit weird if you have a crazy amount of uptime. So either way, let's go into the comparisons. You guys can see this is the weapons and armor that we're going to be using for the comparison itself. We just have a very easy LC setup, nothing too over the top. If you're playing Slayer, keep in mind, you want to go ahead and swap out something like Grand Dreadkeeper LC, or you can swap it out for a stat, like maybe precision or something along those lines. You can use more of the trios. More of the trios technically is going to be more damage, but it also is going to make you a bit squishier. And Slayer is already a fairly squishy class. And yes, it is worth using the Grand Dreadkeeper LC. If you're not playing Slayer, because the amount of effective potency floor is insane, meaning it does help out quite a bit with those hits that don't crit. I'm sure people are gonna be like, hey, look, man, I tested this, I hit it on the dummy or whatever for 5 minutes, and I ended up with more damage with XYZ. Keep in mind, guys, these are simply calculations. Go out in the real world, test these damages, or test the damage yourself. What you'll find is, in a lot of cases, what you test versus what someone else tests isn't always gonna come up the same. Some people are super unlucky and they never crit minus or by the wall, or regardless of having 80% crit. Some people are insanely lucky and they have 50% crit and they crit all the time. If that's you, well, potency floor is not going to help you when you crit. Potency is only going to help you so much when you're not critting. So just keep that in mind. These are calculations. This is all number stuff. It's not going to be exact to what you get on your end here. The idea is for this to be a guideline, not a Bible, not a gospel. You don't have to follow this absolute. You just can tell the comparisons of the weapons. So looking at all this, what are we looking at for the actual tree here? So the DPS comparison. Our baseline is our radar. I'm going to go ahead and slide this over as much as possible. You can ignore the abandoned customization. The abandoned customization has its own augment set up, and they're basically best in slot with 18 unique augments. So ignore this. Don't worry about it. Yes, abandoned is crazy, but it's not as crazy as you think. This is with the LC augs and everything like that. So we can see our radar, we're using 80% because most of our situation is like 80% PAs anyway, at least with bouncer. And we're going Fatal 1 because that is ideal for what you're going for. Attack isn't bad, you know, Termina isn't the end of the world. Unwix is pretty harsh, but Wix is all right. So nothing too crazy there as far as damage is concerned. Fatal is kind of what you're going for, and everyone should at least be able to get one fixa. Since they hand these things out for free now, you can even get them as a drop from the current LC. So as you can see, we're looking at the Millennium weapon. We want to look at Millennium around plus 80 seasonal, I believe is what we're looking for. Yeah, the plus 80 seasonal should be the one that has all of our augments properly on it. As you can see, it's about 4% roughly behind. That sucks. Not the end of the world, mind you. It's still pretty solid, but it's about a 4% difference on the best in slot weapon. So if your question is, I've got, you know, my radar set up with all my augments and everything along those lines, should I set up a Millennium round against a seasonal enemy? No, you shouldn't. You don't really need one. However, let's say, for example, you're an Argenti friend. Maybe you're playing with an Argenti setup and you're like, hey, with Argenti, you know, I'm using the S-Fan set, should I set up a Millennium round? Yes. Yes, you should. Millennium round seasonal plus 80 is a pretty solid jump from where you are currently. This is minus 15.9%, so minus 16% versus minus a little less than 4%. A pretty massive difference. I would highly recommend, and that's only a Fatal 1. Realistically speaking, if you're picking up these event weapons, realistically, you're probably looking at like Fatal 3, right? It's basically almost free in most cases. It's nothing too expensive. At Fatal 5, okay, yes, it's stronger. I mean, you know, I'm sitting here comparing to Fatal. It's Termina's probably the better comparison, yeah. So Termina's be a better comparison. You need like a Termina 4 to be stronger, and a Termina 5 is 0.5% stronger. Not really worth if your augmented weapon that you're using as your primary weapon is already augmented really well. Keep in mind, this is with LC augments, right? If you've properly augmented your gear, your weapon, you have like, you know, the proper XD on it and everything along those lines. Like this is, guys, keep in mind, this is without XDs. With an XD, like a proper XD on here, it's gonna make a pretty massive difference. You don't want to throw an XD on top of something like you know, a Termina seasonal weapon in a situation like this. So, end of the day, should you build a Millennium weapon? If you're fully set up, you're moving towards best in slot, right? Like let's say, for example, even if you're fully LC ogged, right? You've got your radar, you've got your units. Do you need to worry about making a Termina or like a Fixa 5 Termina seasonal weapon? If you want about 0.5% increase in damage, sure. But realistically speaking, it's not enough. I would be looking at maybe like a 3 to 4% damage difference before I would consider actually making a new weapon in any circumstance. 0.5 is not enough in that situation. Now, if let's say, for example, you were using an Argenti, you just made your radar, but you haven't finished it yet, and you know, you're still collecting some stuff, then yes, Millennium is a good stopgap for you, primarily because it's mostly augmented from the start. Keep in mind that the Millennium weapons, if we pop over here, already have the Mastery augment on here for you and the Setsune. You're basically replacing these 3 augments with LC augments and adding on 1 more LC augment, and then you're done with augmentation. You don't have to do anything else. All you got to do is plus 80 the weapon and you're solid. You're good to go. You don't need to worry about adding anything else to the weapon and you're like all set. So it's very, very cheap. It's very easy. You're not going from base. You're going from 60, which, to be fair, 60 is not that hard to reach, but the biggest part is you're fully unlocked on your potential, and you're plus 80 as far as your limit break goes. So hopefully that helps out for you guys, and hopefully you guys have a good idea of if you should be picking up this weapon or not. Again, I would really, really like to go back to the days of, you know, having weapons that basically create this sort of seasonal power trip where it feels worth to make the weapons. Even better, going back to the days of event weapons with elements on them. Those elements were really fun to work around with and to play around with, though they did do some pretty crazy things for balancing. So I see why they aren't that place right now. Maybe they'll come back again. Who knows? With a new region, we might see a shift on how Sega decides to work on weapons. Though people already find it a difficult time to set up one weapon, their literal best in slot weapon, and their major complaint is about 2.5 mil worth of upgrades. So yeah, I don't foresee that being the case in the future, but that'll be a video all on its own. Anyway, guys, if there's anything I missed, feel free to let me know in the comments below. Like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe when you keep up with more. Let me know if you have decided to make your weapon and how well it's working out for you, because you might just be the lucky one that's getting all those crits and the rest of us are just missing out. Anyway, guys, take care, my friends. Peace out.